Take your Bibles, please, and turn to 2 Kings chapter 17. 2 Kings chapter 17. Not sure if I announced it earlier or not, but we are going to have a missions team meeting right up front here after the service. So if you're on the missions team, please mosey on up after the service just for a brief get together, okay? All righty, 2 Kings. We're in 2 Timothy this morning in our men's Bible study, but 2 Kings this morning, chapter 17, okay? The cost of a non-truth, that's the focus this evening. The cost of a non-truth. I'm going to give you a couple of illustrations from the news, not to make a political point, but to make a point about the message, okay? So I'm going to give you these because they're in the news. And I want you to see what I'm talking about, wrap your mind around the concept. You see, the problem with a non-truth is you never know where it's going to lead, okay? For example, there's been in the news recently a bit of discussion about a swimming meet that they had, I think, in NCAA, and they had a girls' swimming meet, and a guy won it. And the guy got the first place trophy or whatever it was. And so even though his time, as I understand it, would have put him in about 30th position among the guys, but he won among the girls, okay? Well, the non-truth is he's a girl. That's a non-truth. And when a non-truth leads you into now girls can't win. They can't win not because they're not the best girls, but they're being forced to not compete against guys. So you see, the thing about non-truth is that it can be just one step, but then it leads to all kinds of problems, okay? All kinds of difficulties. It was most interesting this week. Many of you know that there's a new Supreme Court justice getting ready to be put on the bench, and she was asked, Supreme Court does a lot of rulings about women's rights to protect women. And one of the senators asked her, can you give us a definition of a woman? And her response was, I can't. I'm not a biologist, or whatever. Well, I'm not a biologist either, but I can tell you what a woman is. I mean, that's not really hard. That's not, the kids in first grade know what a girl is, So that whole nonsense of denying truth, creating a world where there is no truth. And when you have no truth, okay, then there is in fact, and if we buy into it, it's like, for example, abortion is not an issue of rights or of choice. It's an issue of life or death. But you accept the fact that I have the right to do with what my body, which is a nonsensical approach to the question, then it changes. In our local world around us recently, there was an issue about not having a faith-based ministry that was in the news this week. And the whole problem was created when a phrase, the others, quote, was bought into. And because if you understand Christianity is the most affirming and loving approach to life. They love everybody. And if you're a Christian and you're practicing Christianity, you love everybody. Now, if people feel bad about that, it's because of their conviction of sin, maybe, but whatever. But you see, you have to be careful that you operate in the realm of truth. If you allow yourself to buy into and let the world define terms for you and perspectives for you, you're going to be in real trouble. Now, how does this apply to our study of the kings of Israel? Well, we're at the end of the northern kingdom. Now, you say, well, we skipped a lot from Ahab to here. Well, that's true because it was just because we didn't have time to go through all of them. But wash, rinse, and repeat. That's what happens to all those different kings because all the northern kings were wicked. So now we're at the end of the drama in the north. Were the equivalent of maybe 1776 to 1999, that time period, how much time has transpired now in the northern kingdom. And the kingdom from the beginning accepted a non-truth. Now, what was their initial non-truth? Remember, the kingdom divided after Solomon, and the south with Judah and Benjamin, they were down south, and of course the northern kingdom, Jeroboam. What did Jeroboam do? What was his first really political act, religious act that he did in the northern kingdom? Remember this? It was 200 years ago in our study. What did he do? Somebody tell me. Well, he did tax the people. Solomon did that worse, which is what caused the breakup in the government. But Jeroboam in the north, he did something. Right, because they were supposed to, the people of Israel were supposed to go where to worship? Where? Jerusalem. Where was Jerusalem? In the north or the south? The southern kingdom. So, for political expedience, Jeroboam says, listen, I can't let them go back there because then they'll want to reconcile the country and they'll blow me out. So to protect myself, I'm going to do this. I'm not going to start introducing child sacrifices, which is where it wound up ending up in verse 17. Look at verse 17 of chapter 17. And they caused their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire. They sacrificed their children on the altar. A burnt offering. Can you imagine burning up your child as an act of sacrifice? But now watch this, okay? He didn't start there. You know what he did? He started by saying, yep, we're going to worship Jehovah God. But you don't have to go all the way down to Jerusalem. I'm going to make it convenient. We're going to have what they call maybe contemporary church services, I don't know. But they're going to have these services up here to make you feel comfortable and to make it easier for you. But we're still going to worship Jehovah God. See, when they started that calf worshiping, they said, we're worshiping the God of the Bible, of the Mosaic covenant, but they weren't. Because they began with a single non-truth, and for 200 years, it kept getting worse and worse and more devastating until now God has to wipe them out completely. God's going to wipe them out completely. He's going to remove them, okay? So this is the final scene here, okay? Now, you have after 19 kings and 9 different dynasties, that means that there were 19 changes, there were 9 different changes of families. So the dynasty would be, okay, so Jack has Jim, and Jim has John as his child, so father, son, grandson. Okay, well then somebody kills one of them and takes over the kingship or whatever. So there were like 9 changes of families in this line of 19 kings. So it's pretty bloody. In fact, here in chapter 17, verse 1, in the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, began Hoshea, the son of Elah, to reign in Samaria over Israel. Now, the reason why he's reigning is because he wiped out the guy before him. He assassinated him. So he killed him off, and now he's the king. The king before him you spell it P-E-K-A-H. Before him, he kills him off, and he takes over the throne, okay? Now, it says here, the sons of Eli, and he reigned in Samaria over Israel 9 years. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, but not as the kings of Israel that were before him. So he wasn't as bad, but he was still bad. And here's the point, okay? It doesn't matter how wrong you are. In reality, if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're buying into a lie, it doesn't make there's how much of the lie you buy into, okay? For example, as a believer, I can't buy into the fact that people say, well, that's your view. My view is just as my definition of truth is just as legitimate as your definition of truth. Well, I can't buy into that when it comes to the Word of God. If the Word of God says this, whatever it is, I can't accept the fact that, well, I believe you get to heaven by being baptized, or by being good works, or by praying to Mary. I can't say, well, that's fine. You got your way, I got mine. Well, let's live and let live. I don't want to physically force you to change, but I can't acknowledge that your truth is okay. It's not okay. Because I know your truth is going to send you to hell. I know if you If you stay bought into that false theology, when you die, your very next moment is going to be in hell, and that's not a good place to be. Right? And God loves you and wants you to be saved, so I can't say, well, we'll just live and let live. Right? Now, so what happens here is the king takes over. Now, what's happened before this, the king before Hoshea had lost some ground to the Assyrians, okay? And the Assyrians were, by the way, a large country. They at times incorporated these nations, Assyria, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. So if you look at a map, if you could find today, now don't Google it right now, but if you, Iraq and Syria and Jordan and Lebanon, that's how large Syria was. And they had attacked earlier, I think about 4 or 5 years earlier, and they had conquered the nation, the cities east of Jordan, and already taken them. So now, and what happened was, he then put Israel under bondage to pay a protection fee, okay? To pay protection fee. In other words, to pay so much a year so that they would let them go ahead and survive. And what happened was, okay, they were paying that. Okay, now look at verse 3. Against him came up, okay, Shalmaneser, king of Syria, and Hoshea became his servants and gave him presents, okay? Now, why is that? Why did he do that? Okay, look at verse 4. And the king of Assyria found a conspiracy in Hoshea's, for he had sent messengers unto the king of Egypt and brought no present to the king of Assyria. So what had happened was this king of Israel, who's been paying a tax or toll to Assyria, decides, because they're having a change of leadership there, that he's going to go down to Egypt and create a bondage alliance there, and Egypt will help them defeat the Assyrians. And when he finds that out, he comes and he conquers him, okay? Now, I want you to notice what happens here, okay, eventually to these people. I want you to notice, first of all, in your outline, the cost of buying into a lie, okay, or non-truth, okay? First of all, in verses 1 and 2, there was an acceptance. He didn't do as bad as the people before him, but he still did wrong. So there's an acceptance. When you buy into a non-truth, you start accommodating things and accepting things that are not. We see that in our culture, don't we? We can go all the way back. We can go back 40, 50 years in our culture, and we could track, okay, the ascension of perversion and wrong thinking and devastating philosophies in our schools, in our colleges, in our society at large. But where did it start? Okay, it started back before. If you watch old television, okay, then you will see couples on old television shows that are married in the show itself, sleeping where? In separate beds. And if one of them is on the bed, they have to have one foot on the floor. You say, well, that's just so old-fashioned. I understand, it is old-fashioned, but now where are we now? Okay? You see, the progression, okay? And we have to understand this, that we have to be careful. If we buy into a non-truth, we start accepting things. It's just, well, that's the way it is, okay? But that also leads to oppression, okay? Because God would have protected Israel. Remember, when Jeroboam broke off from the southern kingdom, God promised him that he would protect his kingdom, that he would bless his kingdom and protect his kingdom and give him the kingdom if he stayed right with God. But he didn't. And so then oppression comes his way. And then, of course, bondage in verse 4. And the king of Assyria found conspiracy, and so he takes the king and he bounds him up in verse 4. He puts him in prison. And then in verses 5 to 6, you have the loss. And I want you to notice how the loss plays out here, okay? The king of Assyria came up throughout all the land. They started off, prior to that, you get in the cities of the east of Jordan. Now he comes, he gets the king, and now he goes through all of the area, okay? Now it took him 3 years to conquer Samaria as the city, the capital. The capital was a huge city with great resources and tremendous defenses. So that he has to put it under siege for 3 years, but he takes it. Now look at verse 6. And in the 9th year of Hosea, the king of Assyria, took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria and placed them in these different cities: Halah, Habor, by the river Gazan, and the cities of the Medes. Now what does that mean? Okay. The Assyrians had a method. Now remember, the Romans had a method of conquering, okay? When the Romans conquered, okay, as long as you would rule in peace and be in submission to them as a government, they would let your leaders stay in place, or give you leaders like you and let you stay in your place, okay? That's why, remember when they crucified Jesus, the Jews could not execute capital punishment. They had to get the Romans to do it. But the Romans wanted peace. That's one of the reasons why they killed Jesus, was because the conflict and the uproar that was happening. Because Rome said, as long as you're at peace, you can keep your own country, your own language, as long as you acknowledge us. The Assyrians, completely different. What the Assyrians would do, if the Assyrians conquered you folk, if you were like 3 nations here, they conquered you, then they would ship you. They wouldn't ship you all over there, certainly not over there. They would ship 2 or 3 of you over here, and 4 or 5 of you over there, maybe the rest of you in a country over there. And then maybe leave a few of you here, and then they would ship some of you folks over here and you folks over here, so that they would so decentralize the opposition. And that's what's happening here. This whole nation, it's somewhat like what's happening in Ukraine, okay? Whereas because of the war, a lot of the folks are leaving, okay? Now, hopefully, if justice prevails and the right side wins and they can go back, that would be great, but we don't know. We'll have to see what that happens. But that's what's happening here. So there is acceptance, there's oppression, there's bondage, and there's loss. Why? Because they've bought into a lie. Now, I have to ask you a question. I have to ask myself a question. What non-truth are you buying into? Is there a non-truth about some aspect of your life that you're buying into, and it twists everything else? And it causes you enormous suffering and difficulty. Because remember this, when it comes to a non-truth, the answer to non-truth is what? What do you think it is? Truth, exactly, okay? So, if for example, if everybody, the illustration we used earlier, if everybody knew what a guy was and a girl was, and we all do know what a guy and a girl is, okay, those controversies in the public arena would be non-existent, because everybody would know it was a guy. So why didn't we have this controversy 30 years ago? Okay? Or 10 years ago as much. It's because everybody knew what a guy and girl was. It was not really a mystery. If you kept the nursery, if you had a baby, you just knew. Okay? You see, truth clarifies the confusion of error. Truth, it clarifies the confusion that comes with error, okay? So that's the cause. Second, it's the cause, okay? Now watch the verse, look at verse 7. Verse 7 says, for. Now he's going to explain to you why this all happened, and there's 3 reasons why it happened. First of all, perpetual compromise, okay? For it was that the children of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, which had brought them up out of the land of Egypt, for under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and they feared other gods. You see, verses 7 through 12, look down at verse 12, and they served idols, whereof the Lord had said unto them, ye shall not do. Now what happened? This compromise, whenever we compromise, and watch this, we always compromise, you might want to write this down, we always compromise when we transfer our fear. You compromise when you transfer your fear. When I transfer my fear from, I'm not gonna compromise the truth of God unless or until I fear something more than God. Either other people, myself, okay, my situation, And when you compromise, you fear something else. There's an epidemic, I think you might call this an epidemic, but of so many churches. I heard of one, a very prominent one in Raleigh recently, just this past week, who did away with the word Baptist. And here's what they say. They say, well, we're no longer going to call a church Baptist. No, we're still a Baptist church, but we're not going to call ourselves a Baptist church. Okay? And what you have to understand is this, okay? How you get people is how you keep people. How you get people is how you keep people in the church. And if you get people by being dishonest, you've got to keep them by being dishonest. You got to keep them by being accommodating of whatever they want to do. Okay? Now, here's the challenge, okay? Perpetual compromise. Second is degrading stubbornness. Do you know anybody that's stubborn? Don't point, okay? But, people, look at verse 13. Yet the Lord testified against Israel and against Judah by all the prophets. Look at verse 14. Notwithstanding, they would not hear, but hardened their necks. These people are just stubborn. You ever want to shake somebody? I don't mean literally. Well, maybe literally, okay. But you know what I'm saying? Like, really? Do you not see what you're doing here? Is this like, really? You just like, and then of course, if we look in the mirror, you ever see anybody stubborn looking you back in the mirror? In some area? Before we get on a high horse, think, well, I'm not that way. Well, maybe you're not that way. Maybe not today. But stubbornness is a real challenge, isn't it? We get stuck in our thinking, okay? Look at verse 15. And they rejected his statutes. Middle of verse 15. And they followed vanity, okay? In verse 16. And they left all the commandments of God. You see, they are degradingly stubborn, okay? And they worship, last part of verse 16, they worship Baal. Baal was the god of storm and wind. They were looking to Baal to protect them. And then, of course, it resulted in verse 17 of them offering their children, like abortion, other things, on the altar. How many parents offer their children on the altar of social acceptance and social exposure and there are kids accepting things and parents saying, well, that's just how the younger generation is. Well, now you got to be careful with that, okay? Got to be careful with that. This whole controversy in Florida with the, trying to teach kindergartens and first and second grade kids about sexuality. Who teaches first and second kids about sex in school? That's just, any thinking person would understand that's not what a first grader needs. That's not what a kindergarten kid needs. Let him be a kid. Only somebody with an agenda would want to do that. And so we have to be careful about this degrading stubbornness. And then generational sin. In verse 18, therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel, and he removed them out of his sight. And when you read 18 down to verse 23, okay, look at verse 21. And he rent Israel from the house of David, and they made Jeroboam the son of Naboth king, and Jeroboam drove Israel from following the Lord and make sin a great sin. And the children of Israel walked in all the sins of Jeroboam. This is a generational thing. Let me challenge you about something, okay? All of us who have children, grandchildren, maybe great-grandchildren, if you understand something, there is a generational impact of sin. There's a generational impact of righteousness. I must tell you this. I thought about this week. My great-grandfather, he was a real not good person. He was not a good person. You said, did you ever meet him? Never met him. But I know what he did. He wanted to leave Italy in the late teens, early 20s, 20s, and his wife did not want to come to Israel. Israel, to America, which maybe probably going to Israel. Okay, going to America. So he brings his girlfriend with him. So it's a whole new family up in the Philadelphia area. Okay? Now he was a dog. You say, well, you didn't know him. I don't know, but a guy that does that's a dog. He's not a nice person. Right? It's just not right. But you know what? His son, my grandfather, and my father did not follow through with that. I thought about this often about my dad. My dad was not a touchy-feeling kind of guy. He would say, oh, I really love you, son. Give you a hug. And that just wasn't my dad. He didn't grow up that way. He wasn't that way. He didn't sit me down and say, oh, Dad, son, I want to talk to you about life. I wish he had, but he didn't do that. Okay? He said, well, your dad wasn't a very good dad. Well, okay, let me tell you this. What he did do was this. I never doubted that he loved us. We never worried about food or place to stay. He was always home. My father was, at night, except when we played poker. But a lot of times we played poker at our house, and I tended bar for him. This is before I was saved, mind you, but I would tend bar for them, okay? But what he taught me by example, because I asked him I remember asking him this question one time. I said, Dad, let me ask you a question. I can picture my mind, see the picture in my mind. I was on the floor, he was on the chair up there, his chair, because my dad was not going to do, dad's going to come home, eat, sit, and then back then your channel changer was your kids. Change the channel. And that's what we did, because we went to change the channel back in the day, okay? All right, but anyhow, I said, Dad, let me ask you a question. We have Mom, and Mom has you. Who do you have? He just smiled and says, it's all good. I remember that. And you know what? I remember as long as Dad was home, it was all right. I'm saying to you, there's generational impacts of behavior. And here, there was a generational impact, all right? Then I only got 4.5 minutes. This is going to be a quick landing, okay? The confusion. 2 of them. First of all, the religion of Samaria was established. Remember back in, go forward to John chapter, is it Matthew 4, the woman at the well? I think it's Matthew 4. You know the story, the woman at the well? John, thank you. You were, that's why I got good deacons to correct me. Okay, John. Okay, right. All right. So he goes, and she's a Samaritan, right? Now, Samaritan was both a geographical space in Jesus' time. Okay, Judah, Samaria, and Galilee. That's true, but it also had a religious system. That system then at the well started here. Okay, and what happens is. Okay, look at verse 24. Okay, well, I don't have time to tell you. Okay, here's what happened. Verses 24 and 25 is the problem. Their lions are attacking the people. Remember what Assyria did? They took all you guys, moved you out, took you guys and moved you over here. Well, then when you new guys moved over there, the lions, God multiplied the lions, because there was lions back in those days, and they were killing a bunch of the people. So they go to the king and say, hey, we have those lions up here killing us. We don't know how to handle it. What does the king do? Here's what the king does. He goes over here to some of the people he brought over here and finds one of the priests of Israel and takes him over there to show them the customs of the Jewish people. Now here's why. Because they thought of gods geographically. So then they thought, well, maybe Israel's God is a God of this space. So if we teach you the Jewish law and you keep it, then that'll protect you. That's what they were doing, okay? And so they bought into that, and they would practice the religion externally. They didn't buy into it. They still kept worshiping the other gods. So by the time you get to the woman at the well at John chapter 4, then you get there, you've got all this stuff having evolved into this whole system that claims a connection to the Old Testament that's void of any real truth because of all the compromise, okay? So you have the religious step. And then secondly, generational hopelessness abounds. Hopelessness. The Jewish people are left for generations. The northern kingdom never comes back. Never comes back. And so hopelessness. Okay? So what's the point tonight? Well, the point is to challenge you and challenge me to understand that when we start acknowledging and accepting non-truth, it's painful, it's difficult. Now, next week, we're going to go all the way back to 1 Kings, the beginning of 1 Kings, after Solomon, and start with the southern kingdom. And the Lord willing, between now and the end of May, we're going to then do a review of the southern kingdom, which has more variety to it, because they have good kings and bad kings. And we'll talk about that later, okay?